Today we're going to discuss Article 1, Section 9, Clause 3 of the United States Constitution, which is still the supreme law of the land, which states that no bill of attainder or ex post facto law shall be passed. Well, what is an ex post facto law anyway? Well, the term ex post facto means after the fact, a law that's passed after the fact. The legal definition is an ex post facto law is a law that retroactively changes the legal consequences of actions that were committed or relationships that existed before the enactment of the law. Quoting from a Supreme Court case called Beazell versus Ohio, 269 U.S., found on page 167. It's a 1925 case. The Supreme Court defined the scope of the constitutional ex post facto restrictions. Okay, quoting from the court, quote, "It is settled by decisions of this court so well known that their citations may be dispensed with, that any statute which punishes as a crime an act previously committed, which was innocent when done, which makes more burdensome the punishment for a crime after its commission, or which deprives one charged with a crime of any defense available according to law at the time when the act was committed, is prohibited as an ex post facto." Okay, what they're talking about here is that, as an example, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which ended slavery, and let me see if I can find it here. 13th Amendment, Section 1, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." Okay, now let's see how this works. Okay, prior to 1865, in this country, in fact, everywhere in the known world for that matter, slavery was a common practice. People either owned human beings outright, or human beings would put themselves into bondage for a period of time called an indentured servitude. Okay, now, prior to 1865, owning a human being, whether we agree about it or not, and of course none of us agree on it, it was a stupid practice to begin with, and it was very fortunate that the United States, along with Great Britain being the first, abolished slavery. But Great Britain, because they understood that slavery is a property right, made sure that the owners received just compensation when their property was removed from them or freed. In the United States, when we freed the slaves, we didn't do that. We just took the property away from somebody without due process of law, and there was no reparation for those who had invested in these individuals' property, had placed the cost of housing them, feeding them, medicine, all the things that go along with the ownership of a slave. All that one invested in there was not returned to them. Okay, prior to the 13th Amendment, it was legal to own a human being. Okay? 1865, that no longer exists. It's now a crime. And it's a constitutional amendment making it a crime to own another human being or place somebody into involuntary servitude. Okay, from that point forward, anybody that engages in it would be committing a crime. Okay, now, what's important here is that when slavery was ended and it became a crime, you cannot pass a law now that's going to go back to those people who owned other human beings and charge them with a crime. You can't punish them for something that was not a crime at the time. And of course, to go back and do that would be very unjust. So, our founding fathers made sure that we had a clause in our Constitution that would prohibit anybody from passing a law that goes back and says, what we're going to do is we're going to put you in jail for owning slaves prior to the 13th Amendment. Or we're going to go ahead and fine you, and we're going to take some of your property, and because of this crime that you committed in the past, we're going to make you pay for the damage that you caused these people. You can't do that. Okay, now we go ahead and we fast forward from 1865, 154 years, to 2019, today. Okay? Now we have a group of, I like to call them criminals because it's all coming out of the Democratic Party, which is nothing more than the Communist Party. They now want to pass legislation that is going to punish the ancestors, supposedly. Now, those white people, their generations forward, those who may have had family members in the past who owned slaves, are now going to be punished. Their property, their money, their life, liberty, and property is going to be taken from them without due process of law by enacting an ex post facto law, reparations, that's now going to be applied to anybody that was a descendant of someone who owned a slave. Now, they couldn't pass a law making it a crime or punish the people that owned slaves after the 13th Amendment was passed. It's ridiculous to think that now that what we're going to do is we're going to pass an ex post facto law. Now, most ex post facto laws, the courts have said they apply to criminal activity. And a lot of people will say, well, if the reparation laws are civil, they're not criminal penalties. But they are, because what they're doing is they're punishing somebody monetarily, taking away their property, because someone owned a slave prior to it becoming a crime. So it's a crime today to own slaves. They can't pass a law that's going to go back and then charge the descendants basically with a crime. So what they're doing here is they're charging you with the crime of being a descendant of someone who owned a slave, which was legal at the time that they owned the slave. And now you're going to have to take, for their crimes, you're going to have to pay monetary reparations to those who were enslaved at the time. Of course, there's a lot of arguments that go along with this that make it very obvious that there isn't any way that they could possibly even claim that anybody that existed after 1865 in this country who was here had any responsibility for anybody's actions prior to that. I mean, that's ridiculous. If the government can't pass an ex post facto law holding the people who owned slaves prior to the enactment of the 13th Amendment responsible for the crime of slavery or involuntary servitude, the government cannot pass an ex post facto law in 2019 holding everyone responsible for the act of slavery when the slavery that they're going to hold us responsible for was legal at the time, and that no one, after the enactment of the 13th Amendment, no one in this country has engaged in the crime of slavery. Can the government hold future generations responsible for the criminal act of slavery that was done by those who were engaged in slavery legally in this country? To even suggest that that's a possibility is such a violation of the due process clause of the United States Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights, the Fifth Amendment, dealing with due process of law, No one in this country, none of our property is safe. I am the Ghetto Man. Thank you for watching. If you're politically correct, then you're legally wrong. And if you're not part of the solution, then you are the problem. Please subscribe to my BitChute channel, and please share.